The South Carolina primary has just concluded, and there are some massive blinking red lights for Donald Trump. The first is that he took about 60% compared to Nikki Haley's 40%. Let's be clear, the guy is running as an incumbent. I mean, hell, Trump contends that he didn't even lose the last election, so he would really be the incumbent. And yet, the incumbent is garnering just over half the vote? In Trump's victory speech, he literally said that the Republican Party is unified. If the GOP was any less unified, it would be split into two separate parties. And by the way, for those who say, yeah, well, he's still winning every primary, you want to know what a decisive win actually looks like? Joe Biden got over 96% of the vote in South Carolina. That is what it looks like when you win decisively. That's what the incumbency advantage looks like. Donald Trump may want to sell this idea that he's running as the incumbent and that the party is unified behind him, but performing 35 points worse than Joe Biden is as apples to apples proof as you're going to get that Trump is increasingly weak even within his own party. By the way, this isn't a one-off. It's a consistent theme among the GOP base. In Iowa, Trump got 51% of the vote, and in New Hampshire, Trump got 54% of the vote, meaning thus far, he has at no point come close to consolidating the same share of his party as Joe Biden did of the Democrats. Trump's weakness among his own base is as consistent as it gets. Another blinking red light? Here you go.
The real key here is this 59% of Haley voters who say that they would not vote for Donald Trump should he become the nominee. That tracks with about 24% of the Republican Party, which is right along the lines of what that New York Times Siena poll showed us almost a year ago now, in terms of the makeup of the Republican Party, in which there was about 25% of Republicans who say that they are never Trumpers.
That 59% of Haley voters won't vote for Trump. I want to be clear, that is a death knell for Trump's campaign. And it's not like Haley voters comprise some negligent faction of the GOP. Again, they are 40% of the primary base in South Carolina. And more than half of that 40% isn't going to vote for Donald Trump if he's the nominee. If those are the numbers from South Carolina's Republican primary voters, the most engaged, the most conservative, then just imagine what the general electorate is going to look like. Imagine how those independents and suburban moms and conservative Democrats are going to vote. I mean, hell, even if 10% of the Republican primary base voters snub Donald Trump in an election where every vote counts and where wins will be determined on the margins, then Trump is looking forward to a rough election in November. And by the way, this isn't a fluke. It is the same issue that Trump's contended with in the previous contest in Iowa. In the Des Moines Register poll out of Iowa, 11% of Republican caucus goers said that if the contest is between Biden and Trump, they would vote for Biden, meaning this is a recurring theme for Trump and one that seems to be growing, not shrinking. And bear in mind, these are defections that he can't afford. Remember, the guy's only job is to expand his coalition. He lost by razor-thin margins in states like Arizona and Georgia and Wisconsin, and yet far from closing that gap, the guy is seeing massive defections from within his own base. Frankly, these people should be gimmies, and yet Trump only managed 51% in Iowa and 54% in New Hampshire, and now 60% in South Carolina. And we're supposed to think that's some huge win? If Trump World is going to claim that Donald Trump is the second coming of Christ within the GOP, that's their prerogative, but then they need to explain how the second coming of Christ within the GOP is still contending with roughly half of his own base defecting to other candidates, with a significant chunk of voters outright admitting that they would rather vote for Joe Biden than him. Even if Trump is winning primaries, those numbers are nothing to celebrate. And finally, one more major warning sign for Trump. CNN exit polls asked Haley voters whether Trump is fit to be president if convicted of a crime. 82% said no, nearly all of them. Again, a familiar pattern. After the Iowa caucus, 31% of Iowa caucus goers said no, and in New Hampshire, 42% said no, that Trump wouldn't be fit to be president if convicted of a crime. And look, not that I can predict the future, but the dude is contending with 4 prosecutions and 91 criminal charges. He is going to be convicted. He's already lost every case thus far, and if even half of those 82% of Haley voters in South Carolina, or 31% of Republican caucus goers in Iowa, or 42% of voters in New Hampshire defect back to Trump, still that would leave a massive exodus of Republican voters who would view Donald Trump as unfit to serve. So look, the lazy take here is that I should just shut up because Trump won and Nikki Haley lost. If that's the level of discourse you're looking for, knock yourself out. Because if you don't want to see the warning signs that Trump is contending with in his own base, then you're not paying attention. He's beating his chest as the incumbent, as the only guy who can possibly unite the GOP, and yet he's barely able to even eke out 50% of the first 3 contests. And even then, a good portion of those voters have vowed never to support him, and even more of those voters think that being convicted is disqualifying, which is bad news for a guy who's about to spend the majority of 2024 inside of a courtroom. All of which is to say, Trump may have won tonight, but this is by no means a winning performance. And if he needs more bad news, it's this.
I don't believe Donald Trump can beat Joe Biden. There are huge numbers of voters in our Republican primaries who are saying they want an alternative. I said earlier this week that no matter what happens in South Carolina, I would continue to run for president. I'm a woman of my word.
That Nikki Haley isn't leaving the race, meaning she's going to continue pointing out his faults to his own base. She's going to continue making him spend money on her and not Joe Biden. She's going to continue showing the whole country just how weak he is by giving those anti-Trump Republicans an outlet to voice their discontent. She won't win the nomination, but she can do a ton of damage just by virtue of being there. And by the way, those were all points that were reiterated on MSNBC.
Wanting to have the benefits of the White House and say you're the one who's won before and you're basically the president and the party should get in line and everyone should react to that, but you're not pulling up anything close to incumbent numbers.
Donald Trump always tells us about his greatest fears by announcing them.
Yes.
And the thing that sticks out to me as we talk about all the aftermath of all of this is Trump getting up on the podium tonight and saying,
first thing,
the party is unified like never before. And that is the thing that he's most scared about in this instance. The party is not unified.
And also whether the money continues, which again, as we've said, like that really is the big question because you can't really do it unless it does continue.
My takeaway for the night is that Joe Biden won the night. Donald Trump decisively won South Carolina. That is who Joe Biden wants to run against. And Nikki Haley pulled between 30 and 40% of the voters who are not voting for Nikki Haley policies. They were voting against Donald Trump.
You know, I agree with that it's a big winning night for the Biden-Harris ticket. Going forward, there's only one exit poll question that matters in the rest of these Republican contests, and that is to Haley voters, how many of you will not vote for Donald Trump? That's the only exit poll question we need. Exit pollsters, make sure you get that. And one final observation, which I saved for last because it's the least likely. A lot of speculation about why is Nikki Haley staying in there. This is the least likely. It happens once in a great while. She could be doing it because it's the right thing to do. That is one of the possible reasons. I've seen it. It is rare. That could be what you're seeing here.
Audible reaction from the panel at that thought. Joy.
If I am the Joe Biden campaign tonight, I am going to be doing a deep dive into the 40% of not just South Carolina voters, but about 4 in 10 in all 3 of these contests going forward, going back all the way to Iowa, who have rejected Donald Trump, who is running effectively as an incumbent president, but who could not manage to clear more than about 6 in 10 Republican voters, particularly in the most evangelical 92% white electorate in the first 3 contests, and that means South Carolina. I'm going to do a deep dive on them because, as Lawrence has said earlier, Joe Biden doesn't need all of them. He needs 3 to 5% of them to say that Donald Trump is so unacceptable that not only do they prefer Nikki Haley in the primary, they'd rather have Joe Biden than Donald Trump in the general.
So there you go. Other than taking home the delegates, tonight was a pretty grim showing for Donald Trump in South Carolina. Before you go, I need some help. Please subscribe to this channel and do your part to help grow the progressive media ecosystem. I don't do sponsorships or paid ads, I won't ask for money, but just subscribing to this channel goes a really long way and it helps get the message out to more people. The subscribe button is right here on the screen. You can also subscribe to my Spanish language channel, which I made to reach those crucial Spanish-speaking voters. That link is on the screen too. And finally, if you want to listen to my audio podcast, you can follow that link as well. Thanks so much for watching.